through, and that's because we're rushing through. We felt like our options for this class were either wait and do it next trimester when we could really spend some time digging into it and do what we needed to. Because so many people are new teachers in this congregation, haven't been through the training at all, we felt like we needed to get some information in front of you. So we're flying through things. There's a lot on the handout for you to try to help you. Ask questions, talk to us later if you've got questions, and a lot of you that are newer will. So we apologize for the speed of this, but hopefully it'll get us all together. We're going to talk about objectives and goals now. And I know we've used bad teaching technique and telling you we can't take questions in class, but I'm going to let you talk just for a minute here. If I told you that tomorrow morning I wanted you to be in Lincoln, if you drive to Lincoln tomorrow morning and you're going to get $1 million, and you got all hopped up and excited, jumped in your car and took off driving, what's the likelihood you're going to get the $1 million tomorrow? Why not? Which Lincoln? How do you get there? What are some things you should do first before you take off? You want to define which Lincoln, because probably you headed to Lincoln, Nebraska, which is 9 hours to the west. I was talking about Lincoln, New Hampshire, which is 15 miles to the east. So you didn't even know where you were going. You didn't look at a map and plan out your route. You didn't think about, do I have gas money? Do I have, all those sort of things you have to go into to plan a trip. There's a lot that goes into that. The questions, the visual aids, the lesson plans, those are all part of your map, your driving instructions to get where you want to go. The objective for your class is where you're going to end up. That's Lincoln, New Hampshire. So if you don't know where you're headed, you're not going to end up there, and that's true with an objective. If you don't know where you want to end up at the end of the class period, chances are you're going to end up exactly where you plan to be, somewhere besides where you ought to be. So writing an objective, having written objectives for your class are critical. You just cannot end up at the right place at the end of that class period with the student walking out with the right knowledge that you wanted them to have if you don't, A, define what you want them to end up with, and B, develop a plan for how to get there while you're in the class. And we're going to be talking about the plan part in just a minute. But you've got to define where you want them to end up, or you will not end up there, and the student won't. Adult teachers, I think, often make the mistake, and it's probably from just the traditional background of verse-by-verse studies, but I think adult teachers often make the mistake of thinking, well, let's just go study the Bible. And so you just kind of meander through a class, and you cover what you cover. You walk out with a little bit more Bible knowledge, but it's typically not applied, and you've typically left a lot on the table that you couldn't get into if you handle it that way, or just marginally improved. I think in children's classes, teachers often just think, well, I need to tell the story, which is really a children's version of the same thing. Just, study the Bible. Ultimately, we can't cover everything. We got a 45, 50-minute class period. You cannot cover everything. We can't walk out understanding all of it. It's going to take extra study on the student's part, whether they're a child who's going to continue to grow in their knowledge, whether they're an adult who's going to have to study on their own. We can't cover all of it. So we as teachers have to pick what we want them to walk out knowing. We're going to have to go through the material, that 12 chapters that has been assigned. We're going to have to pick out, here's the things I want the student to walk out knowing and how to apply it, and then we're going to have to shape that into the objectives. So we've got written down before we ever start preparing for class, here's what I want the student to know at the end of the class period. And I would say personally, I think that's the most central part of teacher preparation. Of all the things we're talking about today, this is the thing that has helped me the most in teaching, is to define where I want to end up first. If you start with that, then everything else builds off of it. So you have to start with written objectives. It makes the class far better. It makes preparation far easier. The other thing that I think is very important is to write those down. I think sometimes teachers think in their head, well, I know where I want to end up. But if you don't write it down, you really haven't defined it well. Writing it down in a sentence helps you to craft it so much better, helps you to understand it. But I think even more importantly, as you're preparing for class, then you can look back at that written objective. Keep looking back at it and think, where am I trying to end up? So how does this activity I'm planning, how does this question I'm writing, how does, where I'm trying to direct the class, how does it relate to where I want to end up at the end of class? So look at those written objectives while you're preparing. And I would say, other than reading your Bible text, don't do anything else in preparing until you've defined those objectives where you want to end up. Understand your text, but then define where you want to end up in the class. Then you can start your preparation for how you go about getting that class ready. There's a lot of other material that I have on that on my portion of the handout there, so I would just suggest that you look through and read all of that and try to understand it. The other thing I would say is, don't have too many objectives. If you have 10 objectives, there's no way you can cover that in a 45-minute class. You may have 1, 2, occasionally I've had 3 or 4, but it's going to be a few objectives, things that you can accomplish because your activities and questions have to point towards that. So that wraps up the objectives part. We're going to take a brief break now. We'll give you about 5 minutes to get some water, use the restroom, whatever you need to do, get a stretch your legs, and kind of wake back up, and then we'll be back in here in 5 minutes.